We go and we start thinking about it that this is what is going to happen. Explained because of the perceptual behavior that we are talking about. We are trying to understand that you are trying to connect something which is close to your heart. A connection here which may be reason for the context. Good morning and welcome to the first session in Unit 3, Organizational Behavior, where we are going to talk about a very, very important concept called as perception. Now, what is perception all about? Is it what you think, or is it what others think about you? This is quite a complicated topic. Why? Because we all live in the world of perceptions. We all believe that whatever we think are right. We all believe that whatever happens, it happens because of our thought. So exactly going on the same lines, the perceptual process, what we are going to talk about, is a sequence of psychological steps that a person uses to organize and interpret information from the outside world. Now, many a times when we are walking on the road, when we are talking to somebody, when we are working in our office, we get all kinds of thoughts. We get all kinds of ideas. We go and we start thinking about it that this is what is going to happen. We might think that next moment, the person who's walking before you is going to fall down. Or this person appears to be a very nice person. The lady seems to talk very well. We have perceptions in our own mind. We have our own imaginations, because of which we have our thought process running throughout day and night. Now, when you go back to this perception world altogether, when we get into the perception world, you have to see that there are certain objects which are present in the world. There are many, many objects that govern us. The person observes, the person uses perception to select the objects, the person organizes the perception of objects, the person interprets, and then he responds. Look at the steps. When you walk along the road, or when you're talking, or when you're seeing, there are hundreds and thousands of objects. So we start observing those things. We start getting into the world of observation. It might be a teacup, it might be a mountain, it's a moving bus, it's a person, it's a man who's selling vegetables on the road, it's a vendor, whatever is that, we start observing things. When we start observing, the person uses the perception to select the objects. I'm using my perception, I'm using my feeling, my thought process to select a particular object. The next thing, I organize the perception of objects. I start putting things together. I frame my own story, I frame my own ideology altogether, following which I intercept, I go on in interpretation of the perception. This is what is going to happen. This is why this particular things are happening around me. So I am now interpreting my own ideas, following which I respond. So there is a whole lot of psychological process that goes inside a human being, which comes back and says, this is what is the world all about. So moving further, the selection, organization, and interpretation of perceptions can differ from people to people. That's quite understandable, because we are all born unique. Therefore, when people react differently in situation, it is a part of the behavior that can be exampled, that can be told or explained because of the perceptual behavior that we are talking about. So now what happens is that the way how I look into a cricket match is not the same way you will be looking into. The way how I interpret a batsman or a bowler bowling might not be the same way some other person would be doing. I believe that every single action, every single situation that I go through my life has got a different meaning altogether. So I try to interpret it. I try to find it. I try to follow it. I try to come upon reactions. And then I start seeing that the perception plays a different role in my personality. So perceptions are a very, very important part of the organizational behavior, because they are involved in selection, organization, and interpretation altogether, followed by this perceptual selection is driven by internal, external factors. So I have many factors. It's not just one factor I'm going to talk about. There are many factors. First one, personality traits influence how a person selects these perceptions. Very, very important. Personality matters a lot. For instance, conscientious people tend to select details to the external stimuli to a greater degree. Now, let's talk about this word personality for a minute. If you are a kind of person who likes the bold and the adventure kind of things, you will definitely respond to a greater source of action. You feel it. So everything that you perceive has to have some sort of action, some sort of thrill, some sort of adventure that has to be there. You are a kind of person who believes that everything that comes across your world needs to have some kind of action, needs to have some kind of a factor altogether which will get you excited. If that is not happening, then you are not reacting to that situation at all. So if you are a kind of person who's very, very conscious about your presence, so you will try to react to every small thing because you're very cautious about your presence. That's exactly personality comes into picture. Motivation. People will select perceptions according to what they need in that moment. This will favor selections what they think will help with their current needs and most likely to ignore what is irrelevant. Motivation is a very fantastic concept. Why? Because that pulls you up every day. That tells you that you have to do something new. You have to take up challenges. Now, motivation has got a link in perception. Why do we say about that link? People will select perceptions according to what they need in the moment. This moment, what is it that's exciting you? That's what you will also select. You are not going to select things just like that. What motivates you, what interests you is what you will look into. And that's why when you favor that selection, they will think that that will help them to achieve their current goals, their current visions or needs altogether. So whenever we are talking about motivation in perception, we are trying to understand that you are trying to connect something which is close to your heart, what you like at that moment, what you are favoring in your mind. So then you will be able to achieve your dreams. Or else, whatever else is that at that moment is irrelevant for you. You don't want to get connected, so you just leave it aside. So whenever we talk about perception, you have a lot of internal factors that govern on human body, and that starts telling you exactly why these things matter a lot. Now, the third most factor, what we are going to talk about is experience. What a beautiful word is experience. Why? Because the associations that make you learn, the day-to-day factors that make you learn, that is where experience comes into picture. Experience is like a pattern. You will understand this as you start moving into it, as you start realizing it in the long run. So experience is just like a pattern. So the moment you undergo through a particular situation, your experience tells you this is what is likely going to happen. So your perception starts molding with your experience. It starts telling you this is what is going to happen. So get yourself aware of the situation. So that's why experience and perception has got a connectivity in terms of present and past. The present, what you are enjoying, experiencing in your mind is a perception, is a value, is a story that's going on in your mind, that's getting on built inside your system. That's the perception. Your experience, when it gets combined to this perception, it tells you from the past what is the inference. So you have to learn that factor, and that's why people will select perceptions in the way that will fit according to the knowledge of the past. So it becomes very, very important for all of us to understand here that perception is very, very important. That actually tries to build you, that actually tries to connect you to a great extent. Experience at any point of time is a bigger teacher, is the biggest teacher, I would like to say, than anything else. So definitely experience has got a very prominent value when we are talking about the perceptions, followed by the external factor. So now from the internal factor, let us move to the external factor. What are those things that externally excite you? Size. A large size makes it more than an object to be selected. Intensity, greater intensity in brightness will also come into perception. Let's go with size first. Whenever you look into the roadside, the outside window altogether, what really catches your eyes is the size of the object. The size of the object, as large it could be, automatically just goes past through your eyes. It just catches up with your imagination. There might be a time when the object might also be smaller. That also comes into your perception. But then the larger size objects, the bigger ones, which has got a dynamic outlook, will definitely catch up to your mindset, will definitely come into your mind. It will say, yes, this is what I'm looking at. The next thing is the intensity. How does it really come in terms of color, in terms of brightness, in terms of the source? It immediately patches up to your mind. It says that, yes, this is what I'm attracted to. This is what I want. So when you see a flashy red car, a nice, huge, flashy red car, which is just zooming past your eyes, that is definitely going to affect you. That's definitely going to come into your mind. Why? Because it has a size, it has an intensity, and your mind is able to capture that scene. That's where the perception starts building. So you imagine a fast car means a flashy red car, which is big, which has got enough sound, and it just zooms past you. That's exactly a perception that you are building up in your mind. Now, the next thing is contrast. Why do we talk about contrast? Because it stands against the background, the greater likelihood of selection. Now, you might have certain things in your mind. You believe in certain things. That's quite mandatory. You're not going to go away from it. In your background, at the back of your mind, you have certain thought process. You are not going to go away from that thought process. You're going to believe it. But then, when you start getting into it, it is contrasting. That is, when a perception stands out clearly, it's against the background. It is not what I thought. It is quite opposite of what I'm thinking. That's where contrast comes into picture, followed by motion. A moving perception is more likely to be selected. So that's why I always say fast moving objects will have a perception in your mind. When a train goes fast, when you are standing on a platform, as it really goes past you on the track, it will have a perception on you. It will have a view on you. Similarly, when you start seeing a truck, a bus, a person moving faster, all those motion activities will have a perception on the mind. Repetition increases perpetual selection altogether. It's quite true. Why? Because whenever we think about the repetition again and again, that particular ad, that particular sound, that particular color, that intensity, the repetition of words, again and again when it starts coming in, yes, we are going to form a perception there. So definitely repetition will make a difference, followed by novelty and familiarity. So if you know something, the likelihood of you appreciating something which is already already that is there, is definitely going to make a difference in the person's experience. It is going to stand out. So that's why we say that the novelty and the familiarity of a particular situation, of a particular scenario, is definitely going to help you. It is going to get attracted and make you go through that particular situation. Now, the next thing is that after certain perceptions are selected, they can be organized differently. So you're not going to have all the perceptions in the same order, in the same rank altogether. They are going to change. So that's why the following factors are those that determine the perceptual organization. Now, what is that perceptual grouping? Grouping when perceptions are brought together in a pattern, which is going to come into picture. Closure, this is the tendency to try to create the whole lot of experience of those perceived parts. Sometimes this can result in error, no doubt about it, though the perceiver fills in the unperceived information to complete the whole. So now what we are going to look here is that when we are talking about this grouping, this is where you will form a pattern about the thoughts that have come in your mind. So you will try to collect all things put together. You will build a scenario. You will build a situation. You will now start thinking that this is what I imagine. This is the psychological story that is going on. So I'm trying to group all my thought process, all my impressions which I have collected in the past moments, followed by the closure. This is a tendency to create the final story of what I have perceived. But now what happens is that this will always result in error. Why? Because I'm just collecting the bits and parts and putting it together as a story. So sometime there might be a gap, there might be a lot of frictions which I have not filled in. I do not know what is that story, what is the combination altogether. So now what happens is that the unperceived part, the one which I have not thought, the one which I have not believed, will now come into factor and fill that. That's where the closure comes. That's where the end of the story comes into picture. Now, the proximity. Proximity is something when they are physically close to each other are easier to organize the pattern or whole. So when you are able to imagine the objects, and those objects or those situational factors are very close to you, they are physically there, then automatically you will be able to see that the entire system will be able to go forward and able to receive the entire factor. So you will be able to connect and you will be able to see the similarity that's going on. So many a times when we talk about proximity, similarity, all these things are quite related. They are quite connected in nature. They come close to each other. So we have a tendency to group them together. This is why perception is a very, very powerful concept when it comes to organization behavior, followed by the perceptual constancy. This means that if an object is perceived always to be and act a certain way, the person will tend to infer it actually. It's always that way. That's what I'm trying to say here is that. Now let us say, for an example, for a while, let's think in this way. If an object is being perceived always to be like that, I always perceive that the flower will be in yellow color only, a flower will always be in red color only, or I start acting in a particular way. I always think that I should act like an excited person. I should always act like a person who's above cloud 9. If I start doing that, the person will tend to infer that it is always like that. Your mind makes you believe that yes, all flowers are red in color or all flowers are yellow in color. So now what is happening is perception is making you believe that everything is what you have actually thought is real. So that is why perception is very, very important. Now the perceptual context that's coming into picture, people will tend to organize perceptions in relation to each other, pertinent perception, and create a context out of those connections. Now, this is quite important and interesting for all of us. Why do we do this? People will actually tend to relate. So if I have an object A and there's another object or a context B, what happens here is that I'm trying to relate A and B together. Why do I do it? Because I have something called as a thought process. So I say that, why did I come late to the office today? That's because it was raining. So raining and going to office has got some connection. Now, in fact, if you look into the story very clearly, rain has got nothing to do with my work. But I believe that the reason why I would be late to my office today is because it is raining today. So I'm trying to make a pertinent relation, a connection here, which may be reason for the context, which will become the actual reason when my boss asked me that question, why were you late to the office? Because it was raining. So I'm connecting things. I'm trying to make a contextual factor here, followed by each of these factors will influence how the person will perceive the environment. So the responses of the environment can be understood by taking that process into account. Now what happens here is that everybody will look into their environment. Everybody has got their own environment. It's not just about the physical environment we are talking. It's all about the mental, the intellectual environment that we are talking about. So they have their own factors in mind. So somebody will think this particular situation as a challenge to overcome. Somebody might think that, no, this is actually a barrier for me. I will not be able to do the job. Now, for example, if I'm working in a delivery or logistics and there is a rain coming again, I would think this is the opportunity for me. Let the rain, let whatever comes, but this is my priority. I will overcome this rain and I will deliver the package. But if I have to take a pessimistic perception of the situation, I will think because of rain, I will get delayed. If I will get delayed, the package will also get delayed. And tomorrow when the customer will ask me the relationship of why the package was delayed, I will tell the same story. So what I'm trying to do is that they take the environment into picture, they understand the scenario and put it back into picture. So that is why I say that yes, this is almost very, very important in terms of understanding. There are several factors that will come into picture. With this, I come to the end of this particular session. I hope and believe that all the information that has been shared through this particular session will be of a great help and resource to you. In the upcoming sessions, we shall learn more about perceptions in terms of decision-making analysis. But until then, stay tuned, stay blessed, and stay enlightened forever. Thank you once again for joining me today on this wonderful session.